been discussing several of them since this morning, but there is one which is still missing and which is absolutely key to every one of us: climate change. Considering the weather that we had this summer, it's being very concrete. Like, everybody is touching it concretely. It's a new reality, and we may feel, but as individuals, we feel it, but as a professional, we may feel lost in how to really address climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation. Among the tools that we may have as professionals, there may be tech. So, can tech help us save our planet? I'm sure we'll all listen very carefully to Tom Shi, founding partner at One Partners. Please come. As he'll answer the following question: can we technologize out of climate change?
Okay, yeah, so the answer is yes, but now we're just gonna talk about how. Is this working? Yeah, hello, click a click. I'm gonna press it one more time. Okay, oh, she said, wait a second. I didn't come up with the title, somebody just wrote that, but the answer is yes, but we're gonna mostly talk about how to do it. Almost ready? Nope, that's not a thing yet. Are you guys having some issues? Well, there's supposed to be graphics in there, and that's also not the first slide. The first slide is blank right here. Okay. Oh, if you can just try to save it as a PDF and open it, or if you can leave it in that view, it's totally fine too. How did all those images not come through? That's very interesting. Or maybe you can just stop all the blinking and stuff. Yeah, let's do it. So I was one of the founding team members of Google X, so I helped to grow the team from 6 people to 300 people. That meant that I worked directly on things like the self-driving car, Google Glass, Project Loon, Google Brain, which is the approach to artificial intelligence called semi-supervised learning. It was like the first production version of that in the world, and it powers image searches and voice searches around the world. Before I was at Google, I was executive at Yahoo that ran a multi-billion-dollar business across 44 countries. And then before that, I had a pretty long career. Like, I worked at Microsoft, I was an astrophysicist for 6 years. I did advanced hardware research in a million things. So advanced parallel computing systems, I did it in autonomous robotics. I also put stuff into space. I don't know, there's too many things to talk about if you actually want to know my background. But named inventor on 77 patents. I've patented maybe 3% of what I built. I've run a lot of teams that have built extremely sophisticated things. And now we just do it for the planet. So, yes. Okay. Well, I mean, I could just try to give the talk without it. It's no problem. I know what it says. All right, so we're just going to start because time. And you tell me if you fix the slides. Okay, so first slide is a picture of the Earth. Just imagine a picture of the Earth. Basically, the stat is since the invention of agriculture, the population of planet Earth has increased by 1,000-fold. So it's gone from about 7 million people back before agriculture to about 8 billion people today. And I think that people hear that 1,000-fold metric and they instantly fall into despair, actually. There's this sense that there's just not enough resources on the planet for this many people to live, and certainly not the way that we are living. But I want to go introduce a concept that you guys may not have heard before, but I think is very important for us to understand our relationship on the planet. So it turns out that the total biomass of humanity, if you were to go grab all the human beings on the planet and put them together, it'd be about 350 million tons. That's how much biomass humanity adds up to for 8 billion people. Now, if you compare that biomass to the biomass of all the ants on the planet, it actually turns out that if you add up all the ants on the planet, also about 350 million tons. So that's one way that we're actually quite similar to each other. But one way that we are quite different is human beings eat a little bit less than 3% of their body weight per day, so 2.8% of their body weight per day. but ants eat 30% of their body weight per day, which means that ants literally consume 10 times more of the planet than us every single day. They eat about 100 million tons of food per day, compared to humans only eat 10 million tons of food per day. And yet, we don't sit around talking about ant overpopulation, right? Ants are eating what 80 billion people would eat. And so it's not actually about the amount. And I pick ants because they have the same level of biomass, but there's actually other organisms that have more biomass than humans that consume way more than humans do by even greater factors, right? Ants are 10 times more consumption than us. But the reason that we don't worry about ants is that it's actually not about the amount, it's about the style. Right, in the process of ants consuming 100 million tons of the planet per day, not only do they not destroy the ecosystems that they're part of, they actually provide essential ecosystem services that help to aerate soils, cycle nutrients, and they participate in their ecosystems in a way that is very additive, very productive. And as we stylistically go and eat 10 million tons per day, we are basically destroying global soil function, destroying the action of rivers and streams, poisoning the landscape, destroying biodiversity. There's some great slides for this. Effectively kind of on a trajectory to end our existence on the planet over the next 100 years or so. So this is the key question, right? It's not about the amount, it's about the style. And how would you go characterize this style in a really short form? Well, it comes down to a simple inequality, which is every single organism on the planet, other than humans, follows the golden rule. And the golden rule is if you exist on planet Earth, your existence should help to create more ecosystem services than ecosystem consumption. This is the reason that we don't worry about ants consuming 10 times more than us, because they actually give more to the ecosystem than they take. And that is actually true of literally every organism on the planet other than us, and only recently. We actually only diverged from that in recent history, right? So this kind of idea of providing more ecosystem services as a species than ecosystems take is not only approachable, it's literally what every other organism has done. We basically need to just get back into the mold of that. And I call that state of succeeding in that form as humanity becoming a net positive to nature. So instead of talking about just 1.5 degrees C or this disaster scenario versus that disaster scenario, because let it be known very clearly that 1.5 degrees C is a disaster scenario, right? Like, as much as people say, oh, that is the spot that can save us. No, if you actually forward project, man, they are not succeeding with these slides. If you forward project what happens at 1.5 degrees C, the last time that we had this concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there were alligators in Alaska. There was almost no ice caps on the planet. The thing is that the IPCC projects to the year 2100, but if you have anything like this concentration and you project out for 300 years, you end up with no ice caps, you end up with alligators in Alaska. We are not ready for a planet that is going to be like that. And I think that because of that, we've set our goals way too low, right? Basically just limiting emissions and just dealing with the amount of damage that we've already put up there is certainly not enough. And keeping it particular, or even getting to net zero by 2050 is certainly not enough. What you actually need to do is you need to repair the atmosphere. You need to go from, we're about 420, 425 parts per million, depending on the month at the moment. We need to bring that back down to 280 to 300. And what that actually represents is a substantial mass transfer problem, right? And you guys, so I'm formally trained as a physicist, so I'll say things like mass transfer. All it means is that some stuff is in the wrong place and needs to go to a different place. And how much stuff are we talking about? It's actually 1.6 trillion tons. So there's a little bit more than a trillion up in the atmosphere. There's a little bit more than half a trillion that's dissolved in the oceans. And the planet will continue to be imbalanced, and those imbalances will continue to have cascading destructive effects until we repair things at the scale of 1.6 trillion tons. And this puts into light a lot of the activities that we've been talking about, because I get to see entrepreneurs all the time and they kind of brag about when we get to scale, we're going to have abated 10 million tons, we're doing our part. And you guys know math, right? A trillion is a million times a million. So when people are basically saying like, we're gonna get to 1 million tons, oh, see, that's pretty fun. Oh, yes, I don't know why it blinks so much, but this is the stat, yes. These are all the things that I just said. Ants eat way more than us. And they're very much like us. They're omnivores, they create societies, everything. Whoops, I don't know why this keeps on blinking. Wow, that's amazing. So that's the inequality. Basically, every species on the planet provides more ecosystem services than consumption. Oh my gosh, this is amazing, guys. Yes, it's fine. Actually, this is interesting, though. This is the entire arc of the industrial, since the Industrial Revolution. So in 1750, this is the concentration of the atmosphere. We burned coal, oil, gas. We created cement. We did land use changes. And actually, if it was just up to human activities, we would have already extincted ourselves. We'd already be up at 570 parts per million. We'd be on a fully unlivable planet. But luckily, nature is already on our side. So nature has absorbed, roughly 600 billion. I'm not sure what you guys are trying to do right now. Sorry. Nature has, the ocean has absorbed almost 600 billion tons. The land has absorbed almost 700 billion tons. These numbers are from 2018, so all these numbers are a little bit higher now. And then the remainder is up in the atmosphere, and this is basically the debt that we need to pay, the mass transfer that we need to succeed at. And beyond that, we're basically wiping out everything. We're driving the 6th mass extinction on the planet. And those are the sorts of things that if we do not get on the other side of, then we are going to end up with, if we actually see through this mass extinction, which there's no signs that we are gonna stop that at the moment, then the repair of the planet's biodiversity will take about 20 million years. I'm not convinced that we will be around for the end of that if we actually do wipe out the majority of biodiversity on the planet in the next 100 to 150 years, which is what we're currently on. So obviously the damage is large and the time frame is short. So what does it practically look like to try to become a net positive to nature? Well, as I mentioned, my background is in doing deep tech and both directly inventing things and also forming teams that can go invent compelling things. And I want to introduce you to the concept of what I call an invention catalyst. So everybody knows what an invention is. You just try to work on something, you make it a little bit better. But typically when you invent something, then just the thing itself gets a little bit better. So you made your toaster a little better, it takes 15 seconds less to go do the toast. Great, then toaster is better. But it doesn't change that much else about your life. But invention catalyst is a special subset of inventions, which are inventions that their presence basically changes the entire landscape, changes the entire industry, changes the entire system that they are part of. So luckily in my career, I actually got to work on a lot of invention catalysts. Some of them, it's a mixed bag. Obviously, I did work on email, so sorry about that. I worked on search, so I think that's generally good. And I got to work on things like, for example, the self-driving car. And in all those cases, and obviously mobile phones are things that catalyzed a complete change in how society works, so on and so forth. But yes, things like a self-driving car is another example of invention catalyst, because not only do you have a car that just has a cool new function, when cars are able to drive themselves, we can completely change the level of utilization of every car on the planet. Right now, the average car that is owned by a human being is used less than 4% of the time. This means 96% of the time, a valuable, expensive asset that took a lot of mined materials and all this embodied carbon is just sitting around doing nothing. In a world where cars can drive themselves, then most people don't necessarily need to own cars, and we can actually just pull up the car that we want on an app, and those cars could have 40% utilization instead of 4% utilization, which means you could reduce the number of cars on the planet while maintaining the same level of transportation utility by a factor of 4 or 5. And imagine what the big cities of the planet, like New York City with 75% fewer cars, 80% fewer cars, it completely changes what it would be to live in those settings. And we used to joke when we were working on the self-driving car that once we got to scale with the technology, and it was the main way that we were doing cars, that we would go around to all the parking lot signs in the cities and erase the trailing letters and just leave the word park. Because it gives you the possibility of reimagining how you do cities. 30% of cities is used for parking, right? So think about reclaiming all that space to be able to do other things like public spaces, parks, community supporting areas. It's catalytic, it's beyond just a car becoming a better car. Now, what does it look like to go take that concept of invention catalyst, but bring it to the question of how humanity becomes a net positive to nature? And this starts to overlap with the work that we do in the firm. So basically, all we do is find disruptive deep tech, which can be catalytic toward our relationship to nature. And one of these examples is, this is a UK company who has invented drones that is able to go, each drone can directly seed 120 seeds per minute, or spread 1.5 metric tons of seed per day. So, because it has a couple different planting mechanisms. But let's just talk about, what happens if you're able to use tech like this to plant 20 billion trees a year. Well, it turns out that trees, on average at maturity, weigh between 2 to 20 tons, and trees are about 48% carbon by mass. And that carbon didn't come from the soil, it all came from the atmosphere. In fact, 95+% of the mass of any plant that you see is actually crystallized air. Like almost no mass of a plant comes from the soil. If the mass of a tree came from the soil, there'd be a tree-sized hole under every tree. But not only is there not a tree-sized hole, it tends to bulge out a little bit because it is basically a collector that is basically grabbing material from the air. Carbon dioxide, oxygen, hydrogen, depending on the plant, some nitrogen. Anyway, so imagine, you got these trees, they're 50% carbon by mass, they weigh 2 to 20 tons. It means that when you see a tree at maturity, then you're seeing 1 to 10 tons of carbon that got crystallized out of the air. And this is still just the average. Like a giant redwood is actually closer to 1,000 to 2,000 tons. Like there are bigger trees yet, but you can't plant those everywhere. Now, in a world where you could plant 20 billion trees per year, well, how viable is this with the tech that we have? It actually turns out that it'd only take about 9,000 drones and 450 people to do 20 billion trees per year, and an operating cost less than $80 million per year. And this is something that over the course of just a generation could go do enough planting on the scale of 500 million to 1.1 billion hectares could be planted in that time period. That by itself could actually do a large percentage of the repair, a large percentage of the mass transfer of 1.6 trillion tons. We can go into more detail on that if you want. We are running out of time. So another invention catalyst. So the way that we grow our food is choking the planet in a number of ways. In fact, agriculture is the major driver of biodiversity loss, reduction in soil function, and water pollution on the planet. So this is basically an approach to agriculture that is fully robotic agriculture from seed to harvest, with the labor done entirely by robots. Now, what's nice about that is it's actually cheaper than outdoor agriculture. The 3 major cost drivers in outdoor agriculture are inputs, labor, and transport logistics. On the input side, we use 90% less water, 80% less fertilizer, no pesticides, no herbicides, no fungicides, so no poisons are on your food before you eat it. Sounds pretty nice. So that obviously saves money. On the labor side, this is 95% automated growing, so you save a bunch of money. And then on the transport logistics side, we build these facilities. So this is basically greenhouse automation. We build these facilities within 100 miles of major cities. So you can harvest in the morning, eat at lunch with very little cold chain costs, very little transport logistic costs. So something like this is kind of the template of almost everything that we do, which is let's create a green future not just by regulations. Honestly, I admire a bunch of regulations that Europe does. We don't have that in the US. It's just hard on capitalism. You just need to beat people, with innovation. But I admire the European regulations. But I'm just saying that you don't need to win just by regulations. You can actually go in there with the right inventions, and if you can get what we call the triad, which is a disruptive deep tech, which is ushering in radically better unit economics, not more expensive to be better for the planet, but much cheaper. This is a cheaper way of doing growing. It's honestly better for you. We're not applying any dangerous chemistry to anything that you're eating. And paired with much better environmental economics. So the fact that it uses 90% less water, the fact that it's not putting poisons into the environment. In fact, the water doesn't leave the system. We basically keep reusing the water without having a bunch of effluent from the plant. All right, cellular agriculture. So, because it's obviously not just croplands, but also protein production, which is quite damaging to the environment. And these are some images from Memphis Meats. I'm an early investor in that. This chicken and a meatball, and there's a bunch of other things coming. And in our portfolio, we have other things. We have tuna, we have Lots of cool things. Now, why is this all relevant? Well, remember that 1.6 trillion tons that we need to go deal with. Yes, we will be changing the way that we grow our plants. We will be changing the way that we grow our proteins. And it should be focused on less expensive, healthier for humans, healthier for the environment. That's the general gist. And actually, all the stuff that you just saw, there was no GMOs in any of the plants. There's no GMOs in any of the cellular agriculture. It's honestly not required. We actually do scarier things in factory farms than we do in any of the tech that I just talked about. But I don't think that we should completely abandon the land. To the extent that we can do soil regenerative agriculture on the land, and our team is also working with Gabe Brown, who's pictured here, who's one of the top soil regenerative agriculture practitioners in the world. He consults on over 25 million acres in the US, and we're working with him to go deploy a number of our soil regenerative tech that we've been investing in. We didn't talk about coral before, so I'll skip that one. This is another way to go pull down close to 1 trillion tons. But we talked about a couple different invention catalysts, and I want to toss out one more out there, which I find to be quite compelling. And because all the invention catalysts I've been talking about so far are external to us, but there's also internal things that we can do to go change our mindsets. So this is a picture in Quito, Ecuador, and it was actually the night before I gave this talk for the very first time, and it was actually this talk that kicked off the firm, which we're now on the third year of operations, and 64% net IRR. Everything's working well with how we do our thing. But what was interesting about this event was that I came out there to go speak to a conference of Latin American entrepreneurs, but it coincided with a conference that was celebrating 10 years of the update to the Ecuadorian Constitution. And this sounds totally random, but the reason that this is important is that the thing that they added to the Ecuadorian Constitution back in 2008 was they added rights for nature. So a river has a right to flow, a forest has a right to regenerate itself. And this is just a couple paragraphs. You can go look it up on the web and just read, the 15 sentences that are constituting the rights of nature in the Ecuadorian Constitution. And those are just nice words from 2008, but with 10 years of case law, right? Because those words got tested in court over the subsequent 10 years. Nature won a bunch of times, not all the times, because they actually also put oil extraction in the Constitution. That seems ridiculous, but whatever. Read it if you want to have a laugh on that part. Anyway, 2/3 of the seats at COP were for oil and gas companies. We make this mistake over and over. Anyway, because nature had won case law, multiple times over that 10 years, it started to go shift what is possible. And that's actually a type of catalytic thing which happens internally. This was 15 sentences that were written down, and it started to go change what people thought was possible. So beyond the external things that my firm kind of works on and invests in, there are also internal ways that we can go catalyze a different sort of future. And I'll toss in one more thing, which is about a type of economic model. So this is work that I did in Guatemala, which actually ultimately helped to get 1 million people electricity for the first time in their lives. And I was working with my friend who, his grandmother is indigenous from this area. The indigenous folks of northern Guatemala are some of the poorest people on the planet because there's 26 languages spoken in Guatemala, and only one of them is Spanish. The other one is basically descendant of the ancient indigenous languages, and those people can't understand Spanish at all. So they can't get government services in Guatemala. Anyway, long story short, we had been out there selling this solar electric box to be able to give them electricity. It was a little too expensive because these people live on $1 or $2 a day, and the box costs something like $85, $90 at that point. And instead of just hammering on that, we just changed the business model a little bit, because I'm sure all of you guys have noticed that hardware today is not particularly reliable. If you buy a cell phone and it's 5 years old, it's a piece of garbage, basically. And what happened, right? Because you could have bought a blender 50 years ago and it works fine. And now, we take a cell phone and it's advanced, but it doesn't work at all in 5 years. Well, it's not that we got worse at engineering, we got worse at business, right? Because the nature of the business model for typical retail hardware is you make all of your margin at the point of sale. which means that you have this strong incentive to go reduce the BOM. Every single moment that you can reduce the cost structure of the materials that you put into it, the quality of the labor that you put into it, you make more money. And those incentives basically lead to this tug of war where all our hardware is garbage now. Now, what we recognized is that if we could change this business model to be pay-as-you-go solar, right? So basically, and we priced it to save them money instantly. We priced a week of electricity to be cheaper than a week of candles, which is the main way they were lighting their homes. So they were saving money literally within the first week. Then we could basically get these boxes out to them immediately, start cash flowing from that, and it actually changed the incentive. Instead of stack ranking the most expensive components and trying to reduce the cost of the BOM, we actually stack ranked the components by mean time to failure. And we actually got rid of the components that were most likely to fail, because the longer that this stays in the field, the more money that you make from the thing. And that actually, with an addition of $12 of cost, we took a thing with a mean time of failure that might have been 8 or 9 years, and we got it to over 50 years. And actually, this has been out in the super humid jungles of Guatemala, like almost 1 million units for a decade, and we've had almost no failures. So, and it didn't take different engineers. We actually redid the hardware engineering on this in less than 3 weeks. This is us, once again, having a consciousness shift that is basically leading to radically different outcomes than before. So anyway, last thing, I run a firm called At One Ventures. You can find more about up there. We're already 30 invention catalysts into this thing, and 64% net IRR. We're raising our fund too right now. Everything's pretty cool. But go ahead and go to the website if you want to read more. I think I need to finish. This is how you contact me. Thank you. Bye-bye.